From San Juan, Governor Rossello. Good to see you, sir, again.
Hello, Chuck. Thank you for the opportunity.
Let me ask you this. Has the president made contact with you in the last few days as this issue has percolated in his head?
No, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the president in the past couple of days. We have been in communication with several of the White House staff members for a variety of issues concerning Puerto Rico, but no, I have not spoken to him recently.
I got to ask you, what was your initial reaction when you saw those tweets this morning?
Well, you know, the victims and the people of Puerto Rico should not have their pain questioned. This is certainly, statements that are wrong. We went on an effort to identify how many excess deaths occurred in Puerto Rico as a product of Maria. We wanted to do it scientifically. We wanted to have it done independently. And we feel that George Washington did that effort very well. Right. Remember, Chuck, I used to be a scientist. That was my professional, formation. And I saw how they went about it, so much so that we've taken their estimate of 2,975 and placed it as the official number.
Let me ask you this. Did the federal government ever offer to try to do this as well, to try to help? I mean, look, the GW came up with this study. It's very detailed. Harvard did its own study and had an even higher death toll number. But I understand the GW study is the one you asked them to do. Explain why either your government couldn't do it or why didn't the federal government do this?
Well, once the storm came about, we had typical processes to have accountability of the death toll. Unfortunately, and as you may remember, Puerto Rico had essentially lost all of its basic functions after Maria. We didn't have electricity. Right. We didn't have communications. All of the folks that were working on the government, there was about 40% of them that couldn't even get to their workplace. So we used a CDC protocol that ended up being insufficient. As soon as we identified that it wasn't a good protocol, we decided to go with the experts, right? We wanted to give full visibility, full transparency. Right. We wanted to have not only a death toll account, but also an evaluation of how the communications went about and what we can do towards the future so that we can have a more robust response in the public health arena.
Governor, nobody could accuse you of playing politics. You've not gotten in any sort of back and forth with any individual politician, and those that have, that's their business and that's okay. But you have been very deferential to this president. You praised him and the administration at the time for what they were doing. Do you feel as if you have to take those comments back, or do you think the president is just totally misinformed? What do you make of this, and does it make you reassess whether you think he cares about Puerto Rico?
Well, my job as governor of Puerto Rico, Chuck, is to make sure that I can get as much resources for our people and for our recovery. That is why I have chosen a path of dialogue, of openness, and of collaboration. Of course, that dialogue includes pointing out what has been good, and there have been some good things in these relationships. There have been some good efforts done, like with housing, our relationship with HUD. The response by the DOD was very good in the emergency, and there have been some bad things that have occurred. I was very unsatisfied with the Corps of Engineers' response to lifting up our energy grid. I am very unsatisfied with the bureaucratic stranglehold that Puerto Rico has with FEMA. So my position is the following. Instead of having to kick and scream, I hope that with rational dialogue, I can convince people that when I am saying something, it's because I either see it as something that's done right or something that's done wrong. And in this instance, it is my view that those comments are completely off. They're not based on anything. I think we should we should move forward. I think that we should move forward towards a recovery using a lot of the funds that, the president
Right.
helped Puerto Rico get, so that we can start rebuilding Puerto Rico stronger. But we need to show empathy. And again, it's no time to play politics. It's
Right.
time for results. It's time to show empathy for those that lost their lives.
What can the president do to restore his own credibility with 3 million American citizens that live on that island?
I think having a dialogue and showing empathy, I think that's critical. He's done so in the past. I think it's an important step. I think that having, demonstrating certain things that are still outstanding. For example, we've asked him for an extension on the on the emergency work after Maria. This extension was given to Louisiana after Katrina. We expect the same treatment in Puerto Rico
Right.
now. FEMA denied it, but we can appeal it to the president. And lastly, we're about a week away from the 1-year anniversary of Maria, and we're certainly going to have some events commemorating what happened, and of course remembering those that lost their lives. My hope would be that the administration would show what everybody in Puerto Rico and what the vast majority of people
Yep.
around the world feel, which is a deep sense of loss, a moment of mourning, and an opportunity to heal together so that we can
Right.
rebuild stronger than ever before.
Last question. Do you believe you'd be treated better if you were a state and you had an electoral vote that maybe the president might want to win in an election?
No doubt, and this is the root cause of the problem, Chuck. I mean, I am very grateful that people have shown interest in Puerto Rico. I really hope that this interest spans just the recovery. We have to be mindful that Puerto Ricans have been treated as second-class citizens for
Yep.
over 100 years. Puerto Ricans are part of a colonial territory. This needs to end right now, Chuck. So my challenge to all of the leaders that are running in the midterm elections, to all presidents and aspiring presidents, is you need to have a clear position here. How can we as Americans say that the United States is a standard bearer for democracy? How can we go to Cuba and Venezuela and preach that democracy when we're not following suit in our own backyard? Puerto Ricans have chosen statehood twice in the past 6 years. It is the right time. The American people and the world has seen
Yep.
what a second-class citizenship is and what the treatment for that second-class citizenship is. Now it's time to take action. So I challenge everybody that has taken a position on Puerto Rico to not only do it as a political football, but
Yep.
if you really want to do what's right, take a position on ending colonialism. It's time to put up or to shut up.
Governor, I'm going to let you have the last word there. Thank you for coming on, sharing your views, passionate, and all of us extend our heartfelt sort of prayers for the island as you continue to recover. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.